full-time whistle's just gone at the London Stadium. Newcastle United were beaten 3-1 by West Ham United on a really difficult afternoon. This is my instant reaction in this video. I'm going to be analysing the result and also discussing where Newcastle United go from here. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Before we get going, please do hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. You can also join me on Patreon for extra content for $4.99 a month after a 7-day free trial, or $2.99 a month if you want ad-free versions of these videos. But a really difficult afternoon it turned out to be at West Ham, because I think we all thought that this was a great opportunity for Newcastle to get their first away win of the season. West Ham haven't won at home since February, and they've been really poor, lacked direction and lacked energy and lacked purpose under both Graham Potter and Nuno Espirito Santo. Really deep-rooted issues with protests from the home fans as well. It was a really good opportunity on paper to build from the Benfica win, the Fulham win and the Spurs win, and go into that Athletic game, on this run with a good opportunity to make sure that Newcastle had momentum going into that big busy Christmas period. Now it's picking up the pieces once again, and the same issues on the road were prevalent again, and exactly the same issues. This is almost a carbon copy, if you like, as a review to what I came up with after Brighton a couple of weeks ago. Newcastle were lethargic in midfield, terrible in possession, really poor. I mean, the things that you expected from this game were Newcastle to dominate the midfield, because on paper they've got a fantastic midfield. Tonali, Joe Linton and Bruno all started again together, not off the back of an international break, so they should have been energetic. They should have been there and thereabouts and really getting at West Ham and bullying West Ham. That's what you expected. And also set pieces. West Ham's record on set pieces has been terrible this season. But both of those things were where Newcastle were arguably at their weakest. I mean, possession-wise, Newcastle didn't create anything, but also they struggled to keep the ball for long periods. And as soon as West Ham played the ball through the middle, it got straight into Jarrod Bowen, straight into Lucas Paquetá. And those two players really, I think, dictated a lot of what happened in the game, alongside Freddie Potts, who was making his debut in the Premier League and absolutely was the best midfielder on the pitch and probably rightly won man of the match. So a really disappointing performance. The changes in the second half didn't help, and I think we've talked a lot about Eddie Howe and the build-up of his squad and how a lot of the players are very similar. There's not very much difference when things are going against Newcastle and they need something different. I've said this, if you go back to last season, at the back end of last season, in a couple of games I was mentioning this lack of creativity that there is, and lack of difference that Newcastle have in that sort of number 10 area. You look at West Ham and Paquetá, somebody who's a little bit maverick, who can do something off the cuff. Newcastle don't have that, and when the machine that can rip through teams and has ripped through many teams, particularly at St James's Park, is stifled away from home, it is very difficult for a response and a reaction from that point. And again, Newcastle have been undone by the same real issues, and that's a big worry, I think. And there are questions that have to be asked. Why are the players so lethargic? What was the reason why? Yes, there's a number of games. Yes, the team is being pulled from pillar to post this season because they're in so many competitions, and Eddie Howe has spoken about the lack of training time. It's just recovery prep, like it was 2 seasons ago. But I praise the summer transfer window because it added strength and depth in terms of players who could come off the bench and players who could come in from the cold and make a big impact. Yes, Johan Wissa's injury, we obviously talked about him on the last video, but Jacob Ramsey coming off the bench today, Harvey Barnes coming off the bench today, William Masuda had more of an impact, got a half today and did sort of very little. All of this sort of thing, this is what Newcastle built their whole season around. James Bunt's coming in, injury management, workload management. This was supposed to be to avoid this whole situation where Newcastle lose in a way like this, and then the first thing that people say is, well, maybe the games are catching up with them. But the game shouldn't be catching up with them at this stage, because they've built around that, because they've got such a strong squad. Apart from Wissa, nobody else was really absent. The squad was really strong from 1 to 20, and that's really, I think, disappointing that there were so many changes made and none of it really made a difference. And I think Eddie Howe, arguably got his substitutions wrong. I mean, Anthony Gordon wasn't very good in the first half, but did he need to come off with Nick Voltemade in the whole reshape of the attack at half time? Again, I appreciate that those two players didn't play very well, and Voltemade was a bit lost. I mean, there was no press which unlocked him at all. There was no energy, as I say. It was very easy for West Ham not only to get on the ball but also to play through Newcastle's midfield, which is embarrassing really when you consider what Newcastle expected to do from this game and what we all expected the outcome to be. Where they would impact the game would be midfield and on set pieces, neither of which happened. So Voltemade did struggle to get into the game, and obviously his way of playing, his skill set is very specific in the way that other strikers can perhaps change things with their physicality or get involved like that. I think you kind of have to unlock Voltemade first, and that's kind of been the issue. But the changes were so vast that it didn't really make an impact, and I think it made Newcastle even more disjointed in the second half. I mean, they were joking on the Sky commentary about Alphonse Areola going down with cramp in stoppage time because he'd done very little to really justify getting cramp. He hadn't really been used in the second half, and I think that came from a lot of Newcastle substitutions. There didn't seem to be very much method in the madness from Eddie Howe's subs, but also I think it's a wider issue about a lack of difference in the squad. I've said this so many times. There's a lot of system players in the squad, and what that does is it means that there's very little difference and there's not much you can do to change things when the system is becoming the issue, as I think it did a little bit today. Newcastle were caught out a lot by West Ham in certain ways. West Ham were ready for Voltemade. People swarmed him a lot, and I think that was a big thing. Dan Burn again targeted down that left-hand side as well. So a big problem, I think, this game, because I said in my last video that this game and the Brentford game was really the hinge of the season in the Premier League, because they've already lost a lot of ground, and there was excuses earlier in the season because of what happened in the summer. But this is exactly what the summer window was built towards avoiding, was tired performances in games that they really need to and should win. Joelinton was poor. Maybe Ramsey should have gone in. Again, I'm loath to criticise the team selection because it's very similar to what I said in the preview. The only change was obviously Kieran Trippier, who was ill, and obviously given that Tonali's been ill, there's got to be a question, is there something maybe going round the camp a little bit? But that's only my speculation. But I think my biggest problem with this game is that there needed to be more energy given how big the squad was, given how much there were, and the players who came on didn't do enough. I mean, Harvey Barnes again didn't take his chance, didn't create anything. Anthony Elanga again really, really poor. Those are the sorts of players you're looking for to try and change something. But Newcastle ended up with a lot of square pegs in round holes, and I think that was kind of indicative of the lack of direction from the touchline in terms of the changes made. I mean, to end with Sandro Tonali at right back when Joelinton was on the pitch and hadn't done very much, I think that was a change at the end. Elanga for Murphy was a very strange one. I would have made Elanga for Joelinton, moved Barnes over to the left and brought Elanga onto the right, which did happen, but at the expense of Tonali coming out of the midfield, which seemed very, very strange when Murphy was doing a solid enough job, and he was obviously Newcastle's best player as well. So very, very scrambled instant reaction from me today. I'm sorry that I can't offer more. I'm going to be very busy this week, but there's also going to be player ratings on Patreon tomorrow, and then a preview of the Athletic Club game in the Champions League. A really good opportunity to obviously bounce back, but Newcastle really have an issue away from home. Obviously now they're still waiting for that first win since I think March or April, whenever they beat Leicester. There are a lot of issues I think that are very similar, very samey and very consistent with what's happened over the last few years under Eddie Howe. And a big thing that I've said before is this lack of creativity, lack of difference in the squad. It's all well and good when it works, and it's all well and good when it goes well. But Eddie Howe has built a machine where every player is a cog in a system, and as I say, that's fine. But the system was caught out today. The system didn't work. There wasn't enough energy to create. There wasn't enough energy. There was no pressing. If you're a pressing, high-intensity team, if you rely on pressing at the first instance and you don't press, then you're then you're in danger, and you've got nothing to change it from the bench in a different sense. As I say, Barnes, Elanga, not too dissimilar to Gordon and Murphy. Asula's not ready to sort of take that responsibility, evidently, in the Premier League yet. He's getting there, he's been better, I've given him a lot of credit, but he just didn't take his opportunity today. Lots of problems that I think could come back to haunt Newcastle. They're falling behind the chasing pack for the Champions League, and you need to go and win these games if you're serious about the top four. And yes, they got out of it last year because they had an absolutely fantastic December to March, we all know that, but can they rely on that this season? I'm not sure that they can. So these sorts of results can be very difficult to swallow and very difficult to recover from. Obviously, it puts a bit more pressure on. It is a very difficult game at Brentford because Brentford have a good home record and they are very physical and very get in your face a lot. And Newcastle need to match that intensity, and they certainly didn't today. So a really, really poor performance overall. I'll be back, as I say, on Tuesday with a preview of the Athletic game, but also on Patreon with my player ratings, which will not be very high. If you want to watch that video, you can join me on the link below. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you then. Cheers.